The DAT is getting a lot more difficult for pre-dentals, and it's about to make the dental school admissions landscape even more competitive. How is that? Let me explain. I'm Dr. Andrew. I'm a dentist who is passionate about helping pre-dentals get accepted to dental school. I served on the AADSAS Advisory Board and am the founder of Predenting. So let me explain what's going on. The DAT is going from a 2-point scoring system to a 3-point scoring system, which is expected to make the exam a lot more difficult because there's about to be higher granularity. What I mean by that is that there's going to essentially be greater discrimination in scores. It's going to be harder to get rewarded for essentially guessing correct answers or having really a lack of knowledge and then having that get masked by a 2-digit score. And that's because a 2-digit scoring system compresses your performance or knowledge or lack of knowledge into fewer possible score outcomes than a 3-digit score does. For example, on the DAT where scores range from 1 to 30, there's only 30 possible score outcomes. But on the new DAT, scores are gonna range from 200 to 600 in 10-point increments, leading to 41 different scoring outcomes. So with 41 possible scores in each section now, that means a new DAT, where there are smaller incremental scores, allows for finer distinctions. So if you were taking the old DAT and you missed a handful of questions, you still might have gotten a similar score to other test takers who had slightly better knowledge because the 2-point scoring system couldn't distinguish as finely between the number of questions you get correct and someone else getting just a few more questions correct. On the new DAT with the 41 possible scores for each section instead of just 30 possible scores, the scoring system penalizes smaller mistakes more effectively, making it harder to mask your gap in knowledge. The second thing that's going to make it even more difficult to get a great DAT score is the impact of guessing and really having a lucky performance. So with the 2-digit scoring system, guessing correctly on a handful of questions can significantly boost your score. For example, guessing correctly on just a few challenging questions might have pushed your score from a 20 to a 22, which is a huge difference in percentile ranking. However, with the 3-digit system, the impact of guessing correctly is diluted because the scoring system spreads your score over a wider range. So while you may have been able to get away with weaker content knowledge because the score increments were coarser and larger, guessing a few questions correctly is going to have less of an impact on your score and percentile because the larger number of scoring increments, and it's now harder to jump between scores and really more difficult to disguise weaker prep or gaps in your knowledge. But I'm not just going to give you the kind of bad news without a solution. So here's the good news. There are tools that you can use to score really well on the DAT. Firstly, I made a DAT guide that covers a lot of the topics tested on the DAT, including tips and tricks used by people who score in 25s, 26s, 27s, and even 30s in the sections and subsections. So use that to score well. And you can download that DAT guide for free at predenting.com/DAT guide. It's my gift to you. And the other good news is that the DAT isn't the major determining factor of whether you get accepted. And I know that might sound surprising, and I'm not saying that the DAT isn't important or that you shouldn't score well, because you definitely should score as best as possible. A higher DAT score is only going to help you. But what I'm saying is that it's not the main driver of admissions. I've had people call me, message me, and approach me with 95th percentile scores and above. I'm talking about 26s, 27s, 30 DAT scores who received no acceptances on acceptance day. And they were wondering, how is that even possible? Well, the reality is that there's so many other factors that are going to determine whether you get an interview or acceptances. And I can tell you that because I've helped pre-dentals with DAT scores as low as a 16 and even 17 get accepted to the same schools those people with 26s, 27s, and 30s were rejected at. And that's because dental school admissions is on a holistic basis. So the admissions committees really care a lot about things like your personal statement, your letters of recommendation, the way you go about your secondary essays, activity descriptions, application questions. Everything in the dental school application matters. And that's where you can make the biggest change. And really, that's where the biggest determinant of whether you get accepted or rejected is, not the DAT. Again, try to do your best with the DAT, but if you don't score as well as you would have liked, know that you can recover in other parts of the application. And that's something my team and I help with, and I've helped hundreds of pre-dentals with to help them get accepted to their dream dental schools, and we can help you out too. And if you're finding this video helpful, give it a like and subscribe for more helpful pre-dental content to help you on your path of getting accepted to dental school. That being said, let's get to the third thing that's going to change with how perceived performance versus actual knowledge is going to be shown on the new DAT. So the 1 to 30 scoring system provided less differentiation at the two extremes. Two pre-dentals scoring at 23 and 26 on the DAT might appear equally and extremely capable. But with the new 3-digit scoring system, the difference between scores like a 490 and 570, which is supposed to generally reflect a 23 versus 26 on the old DAT, is going to reflect a much bigger variation in content knowledge and mastery. And on the old DAT, achieving a good enough score really required hitting only a few key high-value questions, but with the new DAT scoring system, achieving each incremental improvement in score is going to require more rigorous mastery of the topics and really not having any gaps in your knowledge. So let's talk about the implications when it comes to studying. The 2-digit scoring system really encouraged focusing on broad competence and avoiding really small weaknesses, because being really strong in some topics, even if you were a lot weaker in other topics, still led to a solid score on the 2-digit scoring system. But with the new 3-digit scoring system, the DAT is going to demand a lot higher level of consistency from you across all subjects and even subtopics within a section of the DAT. And that's because gaps in your knowledge are going to be more easily identified now that there's going to be 41 different scores as opposed to the previous 30 scores, which kind of goes back to my previous points. Considering there's the unfortunate reality that you're not going to be able to get away with knowing less material anymore, guessing your way to a more impressive score, and it's just harder to compensate for gaps in knowledge, it's even more important to score well. So make sure you grab that free DAT guide at predenting.com/DAT guide and watch this next video on how to ace a part of the DAT that you want to maximize to get the best score.